Welcome to page 25 of the packet, working with ratios and proportions. We are going to focus and use this table of country, firearm deaths, and population in millions for these problems. So on number 1, what is the ratio of Colombians to Mexicans? Okay, we're talking about people, so we are going to be talking about this third column, which is population. And since all of our numbers are in millions, we don't have to actually write it out or add any scientific notation. So Colombians is first, so that's 46.3 to Mexicans, and Mexicans are right underneath them at 112. Now, because we are dealing with ratios, you could write it as a fraction, you could write it with the colon, you could write it with the word to. We also could take this fraction and reduce it, right, and we would get 0.413 over 1. So there are 0.413 Colombians to every Mexicans. Would be a way to kind of think about that. Number 2, find the ratio of the population of U.S. to Australia and interpret the meaning. So we're talking about population. Again, that's this third column. So first we talk about the U.S., and we have 309. And we are comparing that to Australia, which is 22.3. Now, if I'm going to interpret the meaning, I want to make it a little bit better than there's 309 Americans for every 22.3 Australians. We want to kind of condense it as much as possible. So if I just reduce that, so I take 309 and divide it by 22.3, I'm going to get 13.86 over 1. So that means there are 13.86 Americans for every 1 Australian. So if you see an Australian walking down the street, then there's almost 14 Americans that will match up to that 1 Australian. So we have, almost 14 times as many people as Australia. That's what that means. Number 3, of the countries listed, what is the minimum value in firearm deaths? Okay, so now we're looking at firearm deaths. That's this middle column. And who's got the smallest number of those? Well, that would be the United Kingdom. So the minimum is the UK. And then it said, well, who has the maximum? Well, biggest number in that column is the U.S. So the U.S. has the most, and the UK has the least. And it says, what's the range? Well, remember, the range is the biggest minus the smallest. So the range is going to be 32,390. So it's a horrible 3 that I wrote there at the beginning. So 32,390 is the range. That's the difference between the lowest and the highest. That's a pretty big range. And number 4, what is the range of population represented by this data? Well, biggest population is the U.S., so that's 309. The smallest population is 22.3 of the Australian nationals, and we end up with 286.7. And don't forget, populations are in million. So there's a difference of 286.7 million in the populations between the biggest and the smallest country here in terms of population, just with the ones given on this chart. Number 5, does it mean anything to compare the number of firearm deaths between two countries without taking the population into consideration? Why or why not? Well, hopefully you understand that it does not mean anything to compare. So even though the U.S. has the most firearm deaths, we also have way more people than anybody else. Looking at the Mexico has 112. They're the only other people who are above 100 in terms of millions, in terms of population. And we're almost 3 times as big as them in terms of population. So we should expect to have more firearm deaths because we have way more people. So hopefully that concept makes sense. And then in the next one talks about, who would you think would have the most? And, we have a lot, but do we have the most in terms of, in proportion to our population? And you do this in a few sections later in Math 123. But you can see that these 3 countries all have over 10,000 firearm deaths, and Mexico's got over 100 million, but the other 2 are, right around 50 million. That is very, very small compared to the U.S., but still they have over 10,000 deaths. So just something to think about.